There's a reaction that shows up in relationships so consistently that researchers have spent decades studying it. And yet, most men either misread it entirely or assume it means something far simpler than what's actually happening psychologically underneath. I'm Camille, and this is Both Sides of Love. Today, we're breaking down what research actually says about female jealousy. Specifically, what happens when another man enters the picture, why this reaction is far more nuanced than simple insecurity, and what distinguishes a healthy version of this response from one that's genuinely a warning sign. By the end of this video, you'll understand this reaction the way researchers actually study it, not the way it gets oversimplified online. Let's start with what's actually happening psychologically when a woman notices a perceived rival. Evolutionary psychologists describe this through what's called the mate quality jealousy framework. The more a potential rival appears to represent genuine competition, someone perceived as attractive, resourceful, or high value in some way, the stronger the jealousy response tends to be. This isn't random insecurity. Research has found this response scales directly with how much someone values what they might lose, meaning jealousy, at its core, functions as a signal of investment rather than simply a character flaw. It is worth naming a key nuance here, so this doesn't come across as one-dimensional. This reaction shows up differently depending on the underlying emotion behind it. Psychology Today's research on this distinguishes between anger-based responses, narrowed eyes, tension, clipped responses, and fear-based responses, which often show up as tie signs: increased affection, more hand-holding, more attention directed at the actual partner, as a way of psychologically reinforcing the bond. Sadness-based jealousy, by contrast, tends to produce withdrawal rather than increased closeness. All three are legitimate jealousy responses. They simply reveal different underlying fears. Anger points to a perceived threat to the relationship itself, fear points to anxiety about loss, and sadness often points to feeling underprioritized rather than genuinely threatened. Take a woman like Sarah, who noticed her partner giving unusual attention to someone at a social gathering. Rather than confronting him directly or withdrawing coldly, she found herself unconsciously moving closer to him throughout the evening, holding his hand more than usual, engaging him in conversation more actively. That's a textbook tie sign response, not manipulation, not insecurity for its own sake, but an instinctive attempt to reinforce a bond she perceived as momentarily threatened. Researchers would describe this as a healthy, proportionate response because it stayed rooted in reconnecting rather than punishing or controlling. Contrast that with a woman like Diane, whose jealousy consistently escalated into accusations, monitoring behavior, or attempts to control who her partner could interact with entirely, regardless of whether any real threat existed. That's where the healthy version of this response crosses into something genuinely concerning. Occasional, proportionate jealousy tied to a real moment is a normal signal of investment. Chronic, disproportionate jealousy, untethered from any actual trigger, often points to deeper attachment insecurity that goes beyond a single interaction and may need its own attention entirely. There's an important layer worth naming clearly before we close. Research also shows that mate-guarding jealousy often has less to do with the rival's actual intentions and more to do with what she perceives about her own relationship stability at that moment. A woman secure in her relationship, confident in her partner's investment, typically shows a much smaller reaction to a perceived rival than a woman who's already carrying some uncertainty about where things stand. That means the intensity of this response often reveals more about the underlying health of the relationship itself than it does about the rival, or even about her personality in isolation. This is where the conversation becomes genuinely useful, rather than just descriptive. If jealousy shows up as an occasional, proportionate reaction tied to a specific moment, tie signs, increased closeness, a bit of visible discomfort that fades once reassurance is given, that's a normal, even healthy signal that the relationship matters to her. If it shows up as a constant, disproportionate pattern, regardless of context, that's less about any particular rival and more a signal worth addressing directly. ideally through honest conversation, rather than either dismissing it or escalating around it. For a man paying attention to this dynamic, the most useful response isn't to provoke jealousy intentionally as a tactic. Research doesn't support that as a healthy relationship strategy, and it tends to erode trust over time rather than build genuine security. The more useful approach is consistency, being the kind of partner whose attention and investment are already clear, which naturally reduces unnecessary jealousy, while still recognizing that occasional, proportionate reactions to real moments are simply part of being human, not something to eliminate entirely. If this gave you a clearer, more accurate picture of something that gets oversimplified constantly online, go ahead and subscribe. And let me know in the comments. Have you noticed this pattern in your own relationship? I'm Camille. This has been Both Sides of Love. I'll see you in the next one.